Well, thank you, listeners. Welcome to another edition of Understanding the Science of You, where we are focused on having real conversations to help you break out of the molds that are holding you back and build bridges to your most productive self. And we have the pleasure today of being joined by Jummie. And Jummie, I don't know your last name. I don't know. Is that even, by the way, what is that? Is that like a thing with podcasts where to like only give a first name is to do a first and last because maybe somebody doesn't want people like finding them? I actually, that wasn't part of my intro, but I randomly had that thought as I realized that I don't know your last name. And do you want to share that, or what is the protocol on those things?
Yeah, no, I definitely share my last name on the podcast. So it's Jummie Moses. My last name is Moses. Very easy.
That's right. Actually, I take that back. Once you said that, I went, "Oh yeah, Moses." Now I feel bad. Okay.
No
So the
worries.
reason that I'm really excited to talk with Jummie here today is because she's, I don't know if the right term is a great conversationalist, but she had me on her podcast and I knew the topics that she wanted to kind of cover. Talking with you and watching the way that you navigated the conversation and the way that you set up points and broke them up, right? I was very impressed and fascinated by the way that you wove that conversation together. And I felt like it turned out to be so much of a better quality conversation than what I was expecting, way more comfortable and everything else. And so I thought, all right, I know you have an interesting story, but when someone's wheels like that are able to turn, I know there's a lot more behind the scenes.
Mm.
And so I was like, all right, there's a lot more to her. Now that I've kind of talked to let the listeners know, but that set the expectations high for how you're going to impress them, everything here throughout this conversation. Share a little bit about your background, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, of course. Graham, I just want to thank you for inviting me on your show. And thank you for that amazing compliment. That warms my heart because, when I have people come on my show, I want them to feel comfortable and I want to get the best out of the conversation. So I'm happy that you got to have that experience. As it pertains to me, my name is Jummie Moses. I am the host of a podcast called Shifting Dimensions. But outside of that, I work in regular 9 to 5 job um, in marketing for a tech company. So that's kind of what I do on the side. I came to the US with my family when I was about 7 years old. So I've been in the country now for 20 plus years. And it has been a remarkable journey, to say the least. My dad sort of made the decision to bring all of us here, not because we weren't comfortable back home, but he just kind of wanted us to really be immersed in a society where we could pursue our dreams, our passions, especially pertaining to education. Education was a big thing for him. So he kind of like really drove that point home. And my dad is a very deep philosophical thinker. And I think I picked up a lot of those skills and interests from him as well. So, really and truly, I'm the oldest of four daughters, and there's been a lot of pressure put on me culturally, not in a bad way, but sometimes in a way where I've had to silence my own intuition and gut, in terms of like following my own authentic blueprint, right? Because I have this thing where I have to set a good example for my sisters and I have to make sure that I don't basically use my parents' sacrifice from leaving everything back home and coming to a new country and basically squandering that sacrifice and not living up to their great expectations. So that's something that has always been on my shoulders. And growing up in that environment, I was a good daughter and I was a good sister, but I was not always good to myself in the sense of, again, not listening to my own intuition, not listening to my own voice, not pursuing my own passions. I mean, I went to school for engineering. I got my undergrad in engineering, which I appreciate the knowledge, absolutely. But if I was honoring myself, I probably would have gone into communications or psychology, something that spoke more deeply to me. So, really and truly, I've just been on this journey of self actualization, trying to find myself, trying to come to terms with my desires and my interests and my wants, and really making sure that I'm now creating a life that aligns with me instead of trying to live a life that was created for me, right? And that can be hard sometimes. And I'm still trying to find the balance, but every single day I put one foot in front of the other And that's kind of what led me down the path of, really starting Shifting Dimensions. Shifting Dimensions was me kind of stepping into the unapologetic, courageous version of myself who's like, hey, I have these interests in the metaphysical, and whether or not people think it's weird or crazy, I'm going to go down this path because this is what's calling to me. So that's just a little bit about me. It's really just been a journey of accepting who I am and trying to live my life more authentically and more aligned with who I am as a person.
So there's a lot that I could unpack in we'll call it in a therapy session between the amount of the pressure, right? Don't squander opportunity, right? Yet, and then the feeling blessed with it being given to you as well. Anyway, there's a lot for anyone to unpack and how to understand and how to not let that pressure consume, I would imagine. So before we go down that path, when you say back home, what was back home?
I realized I didn't mention that as you were talking. Nigeria. Nigeria was back home. And we lived a very comfortable life back home. So coming here was like a culture shock for me, really and truly, especially as it pertains to differences when it comes to race. I mean, back home, everyone is black basically, but coming here and seeing different race or different colors of people, I wasn't shook by that, right? I didn't care. I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like I didn't really see people for color. And I know that sounds so cliche, but it's the truth. I really didn't. I could tell they were different from me in terms of what they look like, but I didn't hyper focus on their skin tone. But like coming into a culture where that's the main narrative when it comes to someone's outward appearance, right? And like the first thing people see when they see someone is like what their color is or what their race is. So that was like a culture shock for me as well. So trying to assimilate into a society where that was such a big thing was also something that kind of led me down the path of, thinking more deeply about interpersonal relationships and just kind of how we relate to one another and how that affects how we're able to show up as ourselves authentically in this world.
Wow. So you very casually just kind of described that your world did a 180 and then you had to kind of refigure things out.
Yes.
And again, at 7 years old.
Yes.
Right. At 7 years old, at this point in time, at seven, most kids are hey, I'm learning how to run properly, right, without falling over every time I do things, and not how to be clumsy, right. And here you are learning how to acclimate into a whole new culture. And by the way, that was a beautiful story about your parents and your dad making the sacrifice to open up opportunities, right. I mean, it is such just a beautiful sentiment. Anyway, so I just want to acknowledge that that you had said that and give him his kudos. That's just phenomenal.
Thank you.
And so, all right. So now, wow, there's so much that we can go into. For me, I grew up in Michigan, in the United States, the majority of my life, 98% of the years. So I recognize that, like, when I go to different states, some slang is different, right? There's different accents, things of that nature, right? And some perspectives can be different. But I've never actually spent more than, a vacation, which is never a real immersion, right? And so it's really easy to think like, oh, well, everybody just thinks this way, or everybody kind of experienced it this way, or everyone views things this way, right? And so I think that there's a lot of value, and especially in this conversation, when we talk about building bridges, right? And just understanding how those differences are. And also just how much those differences get rooted into us from such a young age, for that matter, right? When we're so young and impressionable, before we even realize it, right? Before we even cognizant of making our own choices of our own beliefs, they're kind of placed onto us, for lack of right? Until we are able to kind of navigate them in our own way. And so let's talk about some advantages that it's provided you from having that dual reference points of life to operate with compared to only one reference point.
Yeah. So some advantages of that is, I've always been someone that was really good at seeing different perspectives, right? So, most times people have what they believe, they have their opinion, and they stick by it. And they can't really see any other perspective or any other sort of opinion on the matter. But I've always been really good at seeing both sides to a story. And I think having that experience, being, Nigerian, living in Nigeria, and even coming to this country and still very much being connected to a pretty large Nigerian community here, and then also assimilating into, American culture in general, I was really able to see multiple perspectives, right? So I never really took a lot of things personal, right? Because, again, I talk about, race, and race is such a big topic, but that's just like one example, right? Where I never let myself overthink the fact that, oh, okay, I'm a Black person in America, right? Because understanding where I come from and that not necessarily being a thing. So I was able to kind of not, what's the word, internalize, oh, I'm a Black person in America, and the challenges that come with that. But on the other hand, I was still able to understand why a lot of people, a lot of Black people in America would have that internalized racism or have certain views on how they're being treated in this country just because that's their experience, right? So I would say that was like one huge advantage. Another huge advantage was really understanding that so many different cultures have so much to offer and so much to give. So I found myself being so interested in like different types of cultures. So I remember getting close to kids like myself, but they had come from Korea or maybe they've come from Vietnam and becoming like best friends with them because I was able to relate with them as well and really appreciate and understand their culture. So like that was another advantage of having that sort of dual perspective where it's like, okay, I'm just not in a bubble anymore. I'm in a society now where it's multicultural. It's not just like one sort of, culture or group of people. Now I'm around different groups of people and I'm able to assimilate and get to know all of these different people and find similarities and find differences and honor differences, and just it just made me really appreciate the diversity of humanity, right? So that's like one huge advantage that I'm eternally grateful for.
What I wrote down was you received a beautiful lesson in how understanding leads to acceptance,
Yes,
right? I
absolutely.
mean, a thing that's really stuck out to me was by you taking the time to understand other people, other situations, other circumstances, and being able to walk through both in different shoes as well,
Yeah.
is hugely helpful. And then as a result of that, like you said, you can go, oh, I understand how this person comes across angry, but I also
Yeah.
understand why this person is rightfully to be angry, right?
Absolutely.
Right. And as a result of that, I understand why it's important that I first need to hear them
Yes.
before anything else can occur. Right. This person
Absolutely.
needs to get heard. And then from there we can have a conversation. Right. But until somebody is willing to acknowledge that there is a different perspective, a different reality,
Mhm.
a different dimension of reality than
Yes.
the one that they live in based on their own experiences in life, right? Like until that can happen, like it's really hard to get acceptance. Otherwise you're just trying to get conformity or force
Yeah.
everybody to understand your way, right?
Right, right. Absolutely.
And I
No,
think we
I
can look around and say that doesn't seem to be going so
mhm.
good.
Not at all. Yeah, I agree with you. I think you summed that up perfectly. That's exactly how I would sum it up, is just understanding people's differences has allowed me to stretch my compassion and my empathy for people. And I see myself in a lot of people, to be quite honest. So, people always say that we're mirrors of each other. And I think
Mhm.
that's the truth, really. We come from different cultures, we have different backgrounds, we look different from one another, but whenever you sit down and you talk to someone and you just allow yourself to get lost in someone else's story, there's so many things that you can pick up from that story that you can identify and relate to, right? So that's just the beautiful thing, or at least that's what I consider to be extremely beautiful about just trying to deeply understand people without coming from a point of even trying to like analyze it. Like you said, if I'm across someone who's angry, I'm not sitting there trying to analyze why they're angry. I want to hear them, right? I just kind of want to immerse myself in that experience, almost kind of put myself in their shoes in a figurative sense. And I'm like, okay, I see what the issue is. There's a part of you that is not able to fully express yourself, right? You feel like you're being held down in some way. I can relate to being held down, right? Even though I don't look like you, I can relate to being held down. I can relate to being misunderstood. I could relate to being let down, right? So yeah, I think how you said it just sums it up perfectly, to be honest.
Then I'm hoping that I'm seeing my future, a reflection of my future self, and the ability to so easily articulate and put new thoughts together into sentences the way that you do. If
Well, thank
if we're
you.
good reflections here. So now we're going to also allow you to be relatable here with squandering opportunity, right? I think anybody
Mhm.
who's had a parent make any sort of sacrifice to them, deals with some element of that pressure, whether it was applied by the parent or not, right? They just, kind of, feel it, right? All for good reasons, right? And so now there's the humorous side of me that in my head, as I say this, I go, oh, so exactly. So your parents, so like your dad must have been ecstatic when you were like, this engineering degree and stuff, I know it's cool and looks good on the wall and all, but you know what? I'm just going to go do a podcast.
Well, you know what? The story went a little bit different than that. I will credit my parents for being, in terms of being African parents, Nigerian parents, they're kind of a little bit more on the liberal side of things, in the sense of, they're flexible in their thought, right? Like I've seen them evolve in thought over the years. They're not like sticklers for a certain rule. And I think my parents know who I am, right? Your parents kind of know your gifts. They know the things that come natural to you. So, I've had conversations with my dad now, and I'm the first daughter. I'm the first child. So like I'm kind of a guinea pig for a lot of things, right? And looking back, when it comes to like, you have to major in engineering, you either have to be a doctor or a lawyer, those things aren't coming from a bad place, right? It's not like my parents are trying to control my life or force me down a certain path. They just want the best for me, and they want to guarantee success for my life, right? Because those jobs are known for being high paying, they come with a lot of accolades, so on and so forth. But, when I got out of engineering school, I think by that time, like my dad kind of understood that this was just not a passion of mine, right? So I kind of had the freedom to kind of pivot and kind of explore other areas of interest. And one of those interests was marketing. So I kind of got into the marketing space. So that was like the first pivot. I didn't start my podcast until 2020, and I graduated from college in 2016. So it was about 4 years. My parents are very excited for me to start my podcast because they know the things that I'm excited to talk about. They know I'm a deep thinker. They know I love curating thought provoking conversations. So they were very excited for me. And it was, during the COVID pandemic. So that was a time where everybody was home. So there was a little bit extra time to kind of pour into hobbies, right? So that was just kind of like the journey of it. So I will say that my parents were very gracious. They never once forced me to work in engineering. I took a different path in terms of the corporate world, and I'm still very much in corporate, but podcasting, it's more of a hobby, labor of love, like my true passion. And they're very, very supportive of that. And the first podcast I started was A Word to the Wise. So actually not shifting dimensions. And A Word to the Wise focused on mind, body, spirit. So we talked about mental health. We might also talk about romantic relationships, and then also like finance or something. And I would sprinkle in the metaphysical stuff, but I was still very afraid to go full throttle on that because I grew up Christian, right? I grew up Catholic, and a lot of my friends and family are very into the church. So a lot of the questions that I had, I was kind of afraid to kind of really allow myself to go down the rabbit hole in that way via a podcast because I didn't want to be judged, right? I didn't want to be considered, I don't want to be dramatic, like a devil worshiper or promoting evil things, right? Because anything that goes outside of the realm of the Bible or what people consider to be Christianity, people kind of freak out about that. So I had a fear of it. So I was still kind of in the closet, right? Like I would talk about human design on A Word to the Wise. I might talk about numerology. I might talk to psychics here and there, but I didn't talk about aliens, for example, right? I didn't talk about aliens. I wouldn't talk about just other things that people might misconstrue, right? So eventually, last year, I was kind of doing some work with my cousin who is also in the podcast space. And he asked me the question. He's like, you've been doing this for 4 years now. What's the next thing for you? Like, what calls to your heart? Like, what episodes do you do that, that light you up? And I was like, well, I like everything I do. And he was like, yeah, but like, what do you do that feels like breathing for you? And I was like, well, I feel like I'm in heaven. Like I'm in a trance whenever I'm talking to people about more metaphysical concepts and I'm able to ask questions about the Bible and go a little bit deeper. When I'm just able to have those type of conversations, I absolutely love it. And he was like, "Well, that's what you need to be doing. You need to double down on that." And that as soon as he said that, there was something in my heart that just like kept pushing me. Like I've been feeling the whispers, but the whispers intensified. I feel like my spirit guides were like, you need to double down on talking about spirituality. You need to double down on the metaphysics. You need to double down on all the stuff that you're super interested in, but afraid to kind of go full throttle on. So that's how the idea of shifting dimensions came into play. And it took a while for me to tell my parents. I was still very scared. I kind of started it on a hush hush type of level where I didn't really tell them that I was doing the podcast, even though they're super supportive about my other podcasts. I didn't know how they were going to receive this podcast, right? So I just recently actually told them. I know you and Sunshine asked me this on the podcast, and I think I had said I hadn't told them yet. Well, I have told them about the podcast. I gave them the full rundown, the whole scope, and they're so supportive. They're super, super supportive. They're so happy for me. They know that this is my true heart's calling. And that support just kind of like opened energetic doors for me, right? I just kind of felt this like pressure valve, like release, where I was like, okay, if my parents accept me and they're going to allow me to be myself, then I can really do this. I can really trust in myself. I can really trust in what calls to me. And I can just kind of go in on this all guns blazing. So, yes, they were supportive in a long winded way of
No, no,
answering your
no. There's
question.
so you touched on a lot of important things. The one that I want to pull out of it though is I think this is an important thing because for you talk about intuition, right? And this is part of the thing I think with helping people understand themselves is that generally speaking, most of us don't go to school to learn how to understand what our body's talking to us.
Hmm.
Right. And so sometimes, based all we're left with is what we see on TV or read about something way different than the way it really actually is. And
Yeah.
so when you say feel the whispers, how do you know that you're feeling the whispers? How would you just say to somebody, no, 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 that's feeling the whispers. Don't blow that off. Don't just think that that's, a random passing or doubt yourself.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it probably is different for everyone, right? But I know for me, especially when it comes to the realm of like, podcasting, what I'm doing now, it's an obsessive thought. The thought just doesn't leave me. It just keeps intensifying, keeps intensifying. And I think the universe starts putting people in my path that want to talk about those things, right? Or I start coming across people who are doing what I want to do. So it's kind of like a double down on that. And I will say it's a whisper, the whispers, because it's not always intense with an obsessive thought, but the whispers feel, what's the best way to put it in? When you take a deep breath and you release, right?
Uh-huh.
Like the whispers feel like that. Like when I get a thought or something that's put into my head, or I hear a voice or something, it feels like some sort of release. It just feels right, right? And if
So
I
let's
don't overthink it,
And so, as you're talking, I want to distinguish for people the
mm-hmm,
difference between what you're describing versus like manic or manic energy or OCD,
mm-hmm. Yes, of
right?
course.
How would you say to somebody, and like even for yourself, right? How do you self guide to know the difference between, hey, this is me walking on the path that I'm supposed to versus me just being OCD
That's a
and
great
manipulating it
question.
in my head and thinking that, like, oh my God, all this stuff is happening?
That is a great question. Okay, so I think the best way to distinguish between both of them, right? I feel like the stuff that could be OCD, or like we all have like impulsive feelings, right? Where if someone makes you sad, for example, let's take OCD out of it. If someone makes you sad, some people might run to food, right? Like we all have like our coping
Right.
mechanisms that we just have to do in order to feel okay. I would say that like those feelings, I'm craving a sense of balance, right? I'm craving a sense of safety. I'm craving some sort of security. Like I don't feel like myself. What I'm talking about is more of a feeling that feels like I'm breathing. Let's say I wanted to pursue music, for example, right? But I was scared what my friends would think. But whenever I have the thought about singing, or whenever I have the thought about, writing music, I get happy. I feel like I can breathe. It feels like I'm not holding my breath, right? It feels like I get the opportunity to just exist as I am, right? So there's a peace and there's an alignment that comes with it, versus the other sort of like obsessive thought is more of a need for balance, is more of a need for security, right? It's more of a need of like, I'm not feeling safe right now, right? Whereas the other one just feels more like, when you go to work and you have on like a suit and you're not really comfortable, but when you come home, you can just kind of like be yourself, take off your clothes and kind of chill on the couch. That's what that other feeling gives me, right? Like, oh, I can relax. I no longer have to pretend, right? I can be
And
myself.
so there's that feeling, and I want to provide like a KPI to self-govern with.
Yes.
Like some people would call it synchronicities. Some
Mhm.
people would say like they see their life goals progressing. What are some of like the external factors that you use around you to say, okay, the way that I separate being on my path from OCD is I also see the world shaping itself to support me.
Mhm.
Where somebody can be like, I'm seeing patterns everywhere. Well, there's random patterns seeing everywhere, and then there's seeing patterns with a purpose that are leading to places.
Absolutely.
Right. So I guess how would you kind of, in your words, describe how you use, material things to keep you grounded, but also that by using the material things to also validate your belief,
Mhm.
right?
That's a phenomenal question. Just to kind of double down on what you're saying, like whenever I'm following sort of like impulsive actions and I feel dysregulated in my body, and I'm like doing things that aren't aligned, I don't really have peace. There's no sense of, I don't necessarily feel like I'm on the right path, right? And that might manifest in the sense of like, maybe if I decide to drink a lot of soda because I'm feeling anxious and I'm like going to food, like my skin starts to look a little bit off, right? Or like my relationships might start to suffer, or I might have this feeling where I don't want to go out as much, right? So it kind of is not making me a better version of myself, right? But when I'm on the right path, I always say to people, I had someone ask me recently, they're like, would you consider yourself a lucky person? And I said, that's interesting. That's a good question. I would say that whenever I listen to my intuition and I am in flow with the blueprint of my life, doors fly open for me. Opportunities like fall from the sky for me. I see a lot of like repeating numbers. I see a lot of angel numbers, and I'm being ushered and guided. Every single time I say yes to the universe, every single time I'm like, okay, I'm going to step into the the path that I'm supposed to be on. Like I can give you one example. So I remember recently I had this thought. I was like, you know what? I live in the DMV area, in the DC metropolitan area. And I was like, I want to go to more podcast networking mixers, right? I don't really see that much in DC. I would love to go to more of those. And literally 2 days later, I get an email from Podcast Movement, which I think is affiliated with Buzzsprout. And they were like, hey, we're going to be in DC, like, come out, and to this mixer. And then, I keep going through all of the links in the email, and there's another link in the email that talks about this huge conference that's happening. And there are different tiers of the tickets. And like the first tier, of course, I look at it and it's like almost $400. And I was like, oh, this would be really tight for my budget right now, but I would love to go. And I just had this like funny thought. I'd be like, "Ugh, I wish I could just go for free." Right. So, anyways, I have that thought. I leave it alone. I go to the networking event. It's amazing. I connect with all these amazing people. And at the networking event, they gave us a card with a QR code. And they basically said that if you scan it, you get to come to the conference for free. So it was like the most rapid manifestation I've ever experienced. And like since I started shifting dimensions, I've had a ton of experiences like that with like just positive reinforcement.
But before you were able to realize this positive reinforcement, right? You had to take that first step.
Yes,
And there's always that the fear of the unknown, the fear
of
of the
course.
uncertainty of
Of
that
course.
first step. So, like, walk me through. what was kind of going through your head? Like, this is my fear. This is what's going to happen. Oh boy, this happens. How am I going to? And then how did that then compare to what really actually happened?
Yeah. So, to your point, I think when we're being called to step into alignment, right? You're right, there is fear there. But even before we get the positive reinforcement from the universe, we actually have to do some personal internal work, right? So it's been 4 years of me doing a different podcast, battling with pushing the needle a little bit more, right? So I had to mentally get to a point where if this is my life and I'm the author and creator of my life, right? What do I have to lose, right? I could step into this thing that feels like alignment for me. And if it doesn't work out, at least I know that it didn't work out. Like, but I will never know if I never try, right? And that sounds so simple, but I had to get myself there first because sometimes it's a hobby, it's an interest, but there's quote unquote no real positive reinforcement until you take the step. And sometimes even that positive reinforcement doesn't come for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, right? So in between that time, you just have to get to a point where you're mentally like, you know what, I'm just going to do this thing. And I tell Spirit, I had a conversation with Spirit. I was like, okay, I'm going to start this thing, but if you're telling me that this is where I need to be, you keep making it louder. You've done a lot of work on me. I've released a lot of shadow. If you're telling me that this is where I need to step into, you've been prepping me for this my whole life. I've had the same interest my whole life. You've intensified it. I need you to make things happen. You could talk to the universe, you could talk to your spirit guides, you could talk to God, whatever that, force is that's within you and whatever you connect with as well. And I had that conversation and I kind of just went into it full throttle and I reached out to someone that I thought would be difficult to get on the podcast. I mean, I didn't have any sort of episodes lined up. I reached out to this guest and I said, hey, I listened to you on this other podcast. I would love to have you on my podcast. I just started it. I have another podcast, but this is brand new. I would love to have you on. And I, shoot my shot and shot my shot, I should say. And they responded. They came on the podcast. And that podcast had this that was my first sort of pseudo viral podcast episode I've ever had, right? I have about 13,000 views on YouTube, right? And to me that was like spirit, that was the universe telling me, yeah, you're on the right path. You asked us to show you, you asked for a sign, so here it is, right? And when you're on the right path, things are easier for you. Life isn't easy, right? But when you're flowing or when you're riding in the current that you're supposed to be riding on, you're not going against the current, doors and opportunities will open a lot faster for you. I mean, like I said, the other podcast I had was amazing, but the alignment on shifting dimensions is so drastic. The success I've seen on shifting dimensions in within the 4.5 months I've had it is drastically different from the success I've been trying to get to with a word to the wise for over 4 years. So I hope that answered your question. I think it's like, again, just to kind of summarize, it starts with you. You have to believe in yourself. You have to overcome that fear. And once you're like, you know what, I'm going to step into it, you can ask the universe to give you additional signs. Like if this is what you want me to do, then you need to not say make it worth my while, but you need to show me that I'm on the right path. And whatever that looks like to you will be what manifests.
So, all right, since you opened the door on that, I'm going to go down this path a little bit.
Okay.
It's in line with our original framework, and
Yeah, of course. Of course.
and that is knowing how to talk to the universe or talk to spirit or talk to whatever or guides, right? Like, and I appreciate the way that you were like, look, whatever it is, that's up to you, But you touched on something that my experience has been that it's critically important if you want to be supported by whoever it is you're talking to, is two things. One is that what you're asking to be supported on is in line with what you're supposed to be doing during this lifetime. That's one key. But the other part is specificity. Yep. Simplicity and specificity, right? Like I had to learn that it's like talking to a chatbot, right? Mm-hmm. The ability to infer or to interpret, right? Or to apply their own personal bias into a set of facts. Like that's not going to work, right? You got
Mhm.
to be able to explain what you need to a chatbot to be able to get help succinctly. Did that come naturally to you? How did you figure that out? And based on that, what advice would you give listeners to help them get better responses when they're asking for things?
That's a great question because I will candidly say that I'm still figuring that out, right? Because I'm someone it works for me in terms of my creativity, right? Because I'm not like a rigid thinker. So I'm very like open-minded and open-ended with a lot of asks. I'm like, I used to be the type of person where I'm like, you know, spirit, I want $1,000, but like give me whatever you think I need, right? So I've always been that person. And I've recently over the years, like to your point, realized the more specific I am, the quicker manifestations come to me, right? So, for example, the apartment that I'm sitting in right now, I was very specific about what I wanted to pay, and it came really quickly. So, I do think that you're absolutely right. You need to be specific, keep it as simple as possible, and then it comes right to you. And to your point, I'm still working on it, right? Because, like I said at the beginning, I spent so much of my years living for other people, right? So I have two voices in my head all the time. The one that is my voice and what I want, and then society's voice, society's expectations, right? So whenever I'm asking for something, I find myself still trying to merge society's expectations into my ask. So it's kind of like all over the place. But like I said, I'm getting much better and better. But when it comes to kind of asking the universe for a sign, so for the podcast, I didn't really ask for something specific, right? Because obviously I want to grow the podcast. I want my conversations to have positive impact on the audience that, it's reaching, and I want it to reach the right audience. That's a given fact. But with this one, I kind of wanted the universe to surprise me, right? Because I was stepping into an unknown path, wasn't sure what was going to happen. So I kind of made it open ended because I didn't want to be hyper focused on the numbers, right? So maybe the universe might show me in a different way where it's like I get to talk to someone I never dreamed of talking to before, or maybe somebody might reach out to me that, helps me get to the next level. I wasn't really sure what it is. But the deeper I go into the journey, the more I know exactly what I want, right? So for example, when I was like, oh, I would want to go to more networking mixers in the DC area, that was extremely specific, and the universe delivered just like that, right? When I was like, I want to go to the podcast conference, but I don't have the funds for that. I would love to go to this for free. The
So
universe delivered.
you're not giving yourself enough credit for this, at least in my humble opinion. I'm just inserting my opinion here, so if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
The part I don't think you give yourself credit for, though, is that what you're asking for are the things that are in line with personal. I don't know, personal development, the development of a consciousness,
Yeah.
the development of a soul, whatever else, right? And I want to distinguish that, right? Because a lot of people, I ask for stuff and I don't get I don't get anything that I'm asking for.
Yeah.
Well, universe gets a bad rap here. Spirit gets a bad rap. I'm trying to speak up for him a little bit by saying
Hmm.
that you're not out there asking spirit to give you the latest pair of designer jeans or something, or designer clothes to show up at your doorstep. You're not asking spirit to have that girl who took your boyfriend in the eighth grade from the dance to go get hit by a bus, right? Like,
Hmm.
I think it's really important to
Hmm.
understand, right? Like, what you're talking about is about making yourself a better human being,
Yeah.
right? And that's a really critical distinction when you're talking about asking for things. Like, who is this serving? And if
Yeah.
it serves me, then who does it serve, right? Because
Hmm.
while you're getting served, you're using it to turn around and serve others,
Yes.
right? So that's all. So I
Yeah.
think you're really underselling I don't know
You're right.
what they want to call the vibration or the frequency that you're operating in, in keeping all of that flowing in harmony. And so therefore it's easy to get support because you're asking about the stuff that matters. Anyway, it's beautiful, and
Yeah, no, I just want to like piggyback on what you're saying too, right? I think manifestation works in different ways. Like there's some stuff that like we need from a practical perspective. Like I needed this apartment, right? So in a way this is directly serving me. I guess you could say it's serving others because I get to podcast from this location, but there are different types of things we manifest. But you're right. I saw someone say, I think it was a quote on Instagram, that when you're trying to manifest something that is not just in line with your soul purpose, but is in line with the greater good, the greater consciousness, that those things tend to come to you faster, right? And I truly believe that I'm a servant. And when I said, at the beginning that a lot of the thoughts I would have about my podcast were, they weren't manic thoughts because I could choose to just ignore them, right? I could just choose not to do the podcast. But like it's this intense um feeling. It's less a thought, but more of a feeling like this is what I need to do. Like if I was coming into this earth and I wrote a contract of like, how do I want to serve humanity? What do I want to do? And that continues to unfold. And I'm sure that's going to take different shapes as I, get older and like advance in my career as a podcaster. But I feel like if there was a contract that I wrote down, this was part of my contract, right? Like I've been getting these whispers throughout my life. I didn't know what it was until like I discovered the medium of podcasting, but it's just kind of this like intense. I don't want to call it a burden because that's what it feels like. It feels like if I'm not doing this, then I'm not in service to people, right? And that's why I always tell Spirit, I'm always like, let the audience that this is going to impact, let them find my content, right? Because it's not about being well recognized. It's not about having this like extremely popular podcast. It's like these things speak to my heart in a way where it's like if people can hear this, maybe it will open their mind. Maybe it will shift, no pun intended, shift their perspective, right? Or transport them into a new way of thinking, into a new reality. So it feels like a burden that I need to carry out, right? But burden sounds negative, but it's this weight on me that it feels like an assignment. That's the best way to put it. So in that regard, I feel like I'm working with the universe to manifest something that goes beyond me, really and truly. I might be the vessel, and the people I come across with are part of my soul family to help me, but it feels like this manifestation is beyond me or what's good for me. It feels like a collective thing, to your point. And maybe that's part of why doors are opening and opportunities are being manifested a lot faster.
So tell me if you agree with this, is accepting responsibility and accountability
Mhm.
can feel like a burden.
Yeah.
It does carry the weight on shoulders, right? Based on our prior conversations, right? We both have an affinity for what I refer to as the real Jesus and like teachings. And
Right.
look, he never claimed, hey, just do what I say and everything's going to come out easy, no problem.
Mhm. Mhm.
No, no, no. It was more about like, hey, it's a perspective, it's a state of mind, it's an understanding, it's recognizing that things are happening for you versus to you, right? All of that kind of stuff.
Yes, yes.
And
Yeah,
so, yeah, go ahead.
no, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I've had moments because like I said, I was in a state of deep fear, right? Because again, when I think about it and people listen to this podcast might be thinking it's not a big deal that you're talking about aliens or um ghost or I have I just recently talked to a woman who identifies as a Christian witch, right? And from my background, that just like there's so much fear about being like judged just for having that conversation, which I don't think it's a big deal because I mean I did it anyways, but there's a part of me that just like has that fear, and I'm going to continue to go deeper and have conversations with different people and people who a lot of religious people might think are heretical, right? And sometimes, like I said, I feel it more like a burden rather than like an obsessive thought if I really think deeper about it. And I've had moments where I'm like, do I have to do this? Like, couldn't you give me something else? Couldn't you give me a different purpose? Like I keep using the word purpose because that's what it feels like. It feels like a purpose, but to your point, like sometimes it does feel like a burden. And I have talked to spirit like, why did it have to be this? And I know that sounds dramatic, right? Because I don't genuinely feel like I'm doing something wrong, but maybe because like I still need to deprogram a lot of things, but it's just that like I wish it was something else I was obsessed with,
Look,
right?
emotion. Well, look, I mean, let's be real. I mean, we could spend another podcast episode talking just about how emotions are more addictive and more harmful than drugs.
Yeah.
They literally are. And so to your point, like it doesn't matter if it's logical, right? Feelings are feelings, right?
Mhm.
And not wanting to feel a certain way or wanting to feel a certain way, right? Like
Yeah.
they absolutely influence things. For whatever reason, I'm getting pinged to kind of go back to, by the way, if you don't mind me asking, what was it about this apartment why you wanted it? What was it that like it signified to you, or what was it that it provided?
When you say getting pinged, I'm just curious. Do you feel like an intuitive hit to come back to the question? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm alluding to. Yes.
Um, so
I try to water it down, that's all.
yeah. No, see, that's the thing. Like, I want us to get to a point where we don't have to water anything down. And I'm just talking about in general, right? Like, I still find
Sure.
myself trying to be like, when you were talking about like people will say, oh, this is the woo woo, or I'm not trying to sound crazy because we're afraid that people are going to think that we sound crazy. Like, it's that trying to constantly make people feel comfortable, right? So, anyways, that's just a side comment. But I wanted this apartment at a time in my life where I was kind of, leaving a relationship, and I wanted to live in this particular building. I didn't know about this apartment unit specifically, but I didn't want to move to a different place, right? And so even though I had locked down a different place, this was just something that was just like calling to me. This is like my comfort zone, really and truly. So that's kind of where the special part about the apartment came into. Even though I'm at a point now where I do kind of want to have a different experience and move away from this apartment, but at that time in my life, this was just a place where I needed to be, right?
What's a
And
comfort zone? What makes it a comfort zone, if you don't mind me asking?
outside of the aesthetics, like I live really close to trees, so there are a lot of trees around me. I'm close to the city but not in the city, so like that exclusion is nice. And also this was like my first apartment that I really like owned by myself, right? So this was the first time I would be stepping out of my own zone. And when I got the apartment, I just had this idea of like going into a cocoon, not to be dramatic, but like going into a cocoon, because I knew that this space was going to kind of, I would be shedding a lot, right? Like I was going to be figuratively in the dark. And I got this apartment before 2020 and all that stuff. So I knew that this space was going to be like a shedding, a deprogramming, like coming out of the shadow sort of thing. So that's the symbolism that I tied to this apartment. It was like my cocoon at some point. I'm out of the cocoon now, even though I'm still like in the apartment, but that's what it symbolizes for me.
Butterflies come, still come back to the branch that their cocoon was on, right? It's,
Yeah.
so so what I heard you describe though sounded very different than, the universe just provided me just a practical solution because I needed a place to sleep.
Mm,
It sounded to me like there was a heck of a lot more deep symbolism and
mhm.
support being provided with with the apartment and what it meant to you and what it allowed you to do and being able to support you to be your best self
Absolutely.
on your journey.
Yes.
I mean,
Wow.
I'm just an outsider, just sharing a
No, you pulled
perspective
that
what I'm
out. Yeah.
seeing. But
You pulled that out. That was great. Yeah. Yeah, I think you're spot on. Yeah.
there's a true genuineness and authenticity about you, and like your curiosity and your vulnerability and your answers that I just truly appreciate in our conversation. And so it's a rare thing to feel that coming through. And so I really, anyway, it's lifted me up. I've been in a funky spot today, and so I've appreciated being able to pull some of the energy from you here
Thank you.
on our call. I want to kind of start to wrap this up and give you a chance though to talk about why people should reach out to you and listen to you. We talked about a lot of great stuff, thinking about the feels, right? Feeling in a trance, but it feels like heaven. You love it. You feel the whispers. It's the doors unlocking for you. It's being able to feel it in balance and at peace. It's, that your thoughts are true and on your path and they're leading to the best version of you. There's a lot of practical information that was described, and I really appreciate you being so open about, hey, this is kind of what I feel, this is what I figured out, this is what I haven't, because look, it is all a work in progress. I mean, by the way, don't we always kind of want it to be a work in progress? Doesn't it kind of seem like it's a little anticlimactic to be like, oh, you mean like we figured out and then it's the end?
It's nice that it's a work in progress. It's a lifelong thing, to be honest. It's a lifelong thing. So I think I figured out so much, but then I get to a point where I get another like aha moment and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what?" Like it's the more you know, the less you know. And that's the beautiful
That's
thing about this
right.
journey. And that's why I just keep my mind open all the time, you know.
So speaking of, you keep your mind open all the time. Every time you keep your mind open, I enjoy it. I enjoy our conversations. And so now is when we have our opportunity to do our shameless plug, right? So
Mhm.
I tell people you're awesome, right? And then hopefully, by now everybody agrees. And so they want to keep up with you, right? You're going to be bringing up these, and both on your journey as you uncover new things. And so, who are the people that you'd say, hey, like if this kind of a thing resonates with you, hey, come give me a listen and here's where to find me.
Mhm. Oh, that's thank you so much for giving me the space to talk a little bit more about, shifting dimensions and why people should tune in. So, you know, if you're like me where you are curious about everything, especially as it pertains to this world that we live in, especially as it pertains to the spirit part of ourselves, right? Because I'm really big on spirituality and the unseen part of this world, right? Like I think like Terrence Howard said on the Joe Rogan podcast, like we're cosmically blind, right? And I think a lot of us live life in a very mundane way, right? Like we have the goals that we're supposed to hit. We have the things that we're supposed to do. We have the belief systems that we've been indoctrinated into that we're not supposed to question. So if you're someone who is questioning things, right? You're not really sure where things land for you as it pertains to Christianity, for example. You're not really sure where things land for you as it pertains to reincarnation, right? Or you just want something that you can hold on to that makes you feel like this life is not just supposed to be like work and then one day you die, right? If you are looking to connect to something that goes beyond your physical existence, but it's still tied to it, you definitely want to tune into shifting dimensions. Like shifting dimensions is just a space where, again, if there are any sort of questions that you're too afraid to ask someone or dive deeper into, you can come and, secretly listen to the podcast if you need to, or reach out to me, right? If I'm still on my personal spiritual journey. So if there's certain things that you're questioning that you want someone to talk about, reach out to shifting dimensions 444 at gmail.com. And, just send me an email asking me to maybe bring someone on the podcast to talk about it. But yeah, it's just really a space. My goal with shifting dimensions is to get people to shift their perspective and open their consciousness just a little bit more and to release fear. I think there's a lot of fear mongering going on around when it comes to metaphysical concepts and spiritual concepts. You have people on one side saying, "Oh my God, this is devil worship. This is so evil." And then you have other people on the other side who are talking a lot about like metaphysical practices, but sometimes you can't just jump into those things without fully understanding what you're jumping into, right? Because you could, you know, run into something that's not the best for you either. So I just want to kind of bring balance to that conversation, but still at the same time like help people elevate their consciousness, help people elevate their mind and kind of tap into the magic of the universe.
That's beautiful, as always, right? That's awesome. The only thing that I need to add to that is just to say, hey, if you didn't get a chance to write that down, or if you're driving, don't worry. We're going to make sure to post how to contact Jummie and her bio, with her episode as well. So, again, Jummie, thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself, your story, and being vulnerable and embracing that. And hey, for those of you listening, hope we help somebody to say, hey, that makes sense. That's me. Feel a little bit more comfortable in your own skin, and make the day a little bit better. And that's a win for all. So have a great day.
Thank you for having me on the show, Graham. I really appreciate it.